So we're in our series on Abraham, chasing God's promises. If you want to grab your Bible or look on your phone, we'll be in Genesis 18 and 19 a little bit here in a little bit. But I just want to catch you up from last week. Last week, Abraham had 3 visitors. And these visitors came and they reaffirmed to him that he is going to have a child, a son, a child of promise through Sarah. Now, we talked about how Sarah had decided she wanted to kind of speed things up and try and have Hagar have Ishmael, and that wasn't God's plan. So these 3 visitors came, visited Abraham, said, "You're going to have a son." And they told Sarah, by this time next year, in other words, we're going to come by next year to visit you again, and you will have a son. Now, I don't know about you, but I love it when I know when the promises are going to be kept, right? When you were little, we lived in Kansas City area growing up, and Mom and Dad would say, "Hey, we're going to go to Worlds of Fun this summer." When does summer start and when does it end? Everyone argues about that, right? June 21st is supposed to be the start, and it ends when? Sometime, right? September sometime? There you go, September 21st. So somewhere between June and September, we're going to Worlds of Fun. That doesn't sound very promising, does it? I want to know when we're going to Worlds of Fun. So when God tells them, "I'm giving you this promise," and he says, by this time next year, this promise is going to be fulfilled, man, they have something to bank on. I don't know about you, but I'm waiting for another great promise in God's word to be fulfilled, and I hope it's soon. I really do. I know my daughter's expecting my first grandchild, so maybe after November, I guess. But I want Jesus to come back today. I'm tired of putting up with all the nonsense of this world. I know we had tragedy just this last weekend in Texas with that big flood and the great loss of life. I know we had one of our local guys, one of our firefighters, get caught up in that explosion at the firework factory. Man, just a lot of tragedy going on, a lot of turmoil in our world. We have a lot of people that think they're God, that they can make up their own mind about who they are and what they can do. I mean, I don't know about you. I'm just ready for God to come back and set everything straight. I'm just ready for that. So I'd like timetables. Well, that's what Abraham gets here. After years of following God by faith, of tracking through the desert, now they have a time frame. So these 3 guys get ready to leave. They're getting ready to head down onto what God had sent them on their mission. Remember, one of the men is identified probably as the pre-incarnate Jesus. I believe it is. And the other 2 are angels traveling with him. They get ready to do what they had come to do, which is head down to Sodom and Gomorrah and see if what they heard about what was going on down there was true or not. And as you read Genesis 18, you have this interesting passage in there where God kind of argues with himself. And he says, "Should we not tell Abraham what's going on?" And that's kind of interesting because we're seeing the Godhead, right? 3 in 1, Father, Son, and Spirit. But just the fact that the Lord regarded Abraham so much that he's actually going to let him know of coming judgment. There's another man in the Bible that it talks about that God talked to as a friend, and that was Moses. It says he spoke to him as if someone spoke to a friend. To have that kind of relationship with God would be incredible. They decide, hey, the Lord says, yes, I'm going to let Abraham know what's going to happen. So in Genesis 18, verse 20, it reads like this. Then the Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me, and if not, I will know. Now, if you've ever questioned or wondered, is God really just? This verse ought to put it to rest. God didn't need to come down. Jesus incarnate didn't need to come down and go down to the land of Sodom and the land of Gomorrah. Understand, these are 2 separate cities in the Jordan Valley. He didn't need to go down and see. He's everywhere. He sees all things. He knows all things. He knew what was going on. But the fact, especially for Abraham and what's about to happen, that God sends physical representation to go down and see what's going on sheds a lot of light on his value of his relationship with Abraham and Lot and this world. He says, we're going to go down and we're going to see if what I've heard is true. Abraham goes, wait a minute. Abraham knows Lot is living in the valley, in the area of Sodom and Gomorrah. Remember, Abraham had already had to muster all of his servants and head out and put his life and his fortune on the line to get him back from kings that had taken Lot captive from Sodom. So Abraham goes, you know what? I'm going to ask the Lord if he would spare Sodom if he can find righteous people there, right? So they were turning to go down and see how bad Sodom was, and Abraham steps in front of them. In verse 22, it says, so the men turned from there and went down to Sodom, but Abraham stood before the Lord. Then Abraham drew near and said, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Again, Abraham appealed to God's very nature, that he's just, that he's righteous, that his judgments and his decrees are absolutely true. He's like, surely, God, you won't kill the righteous with the wicked. Oh, I know there's wicked people down there. You know, Abraham's heard the stories. Maybe when he went down to visit Lot, maybe he went down there for a kid's birthday or something. He knew what was going on, right? So he goes, God, if you can find 50 people, will you still destroy Sodom? God goes, no, you know what, Abraham? Because I love you, if there are 50 people there to prove to you that I'm just and to prove to you my mercy, I will not destroy them. Abraham gets to thinking about it. You know, 50 people, the town, you probably aren't going to find them. How about 45? What if you find 5 less than 50? And he goes, no, you're right. I won't destroy it for that. He goes, man, I'm still pushing it. How about 40? God goes, okay. Abraham gets to thinking, 40 still high. 30. Okay. Again, I'm synopsizing several verses there. You can read for yourself. 20. God, if you find 20, will you not destroy? God goes, okay. And then Abraham goes, well, how about 10? And I wonder if God's going, is that the final answer? Right? Now, are we finally on a spot? And the Lord goes, you're right. If there's 10, I won't destroy the city. And the two men head down the hill. They head down into the valley to see what Sodom is all about. Now, as you read the story, you find out that as they enter the city, they find Lot sitting at the front gate. Lot recognizes them as visitors and someone of nobility, even representations of the God Almighty. He would have learned that from his time with Abraham. And we'll talk about that here in just a little bit more about Lot and where he is. But he grabs these two visitors and says, come, stay at my house. I'll prepare a meal for you. They go, nope, we want to stay in the town square. Now, understand this. The town square back then is where visitors stayed. When you would travel, most town squares were safe. There'd be a well. Everyone knew to leave you alone. There would be usually some sort of shelter or something that would keep you out of the rain. The town square was where visitors normally stayed because they didn't know anybody in the town. It was like Motel 6 in the middle of town. That's just what they did. But Lot knew better about Sodom. And he wants these visitors to come stay in his house. He brings them into his house while they're there visiting, while they're there talking. Everyone in Sodom comes in and circles his house, say, we want those two men that came to stay with you. Lot does something that as a dad, I can't believe he did. He offers up his 2 daughters. No, take these 2 daughters who have not known a man yet. In other words, they were virgins. We know from the story they were engaged to be married, but that had not yet happened. He says, take my daughters instead of taking these men. Again, that tells you about the wickedness found in Sodom, that they were going to take these 2 men and do unspeakable things to them. And Lot, trying to protect them, they turn on Lot. They push against him back against the door, and these 2 men reach around the door and pull Lot back in before they can do things to Lot. In other words, they say, you're a guest too. Why are we putting up with you? And they turn on Lot. How does Lot, going from Abraham for protection from God's promise, a place where Lot gained a lot of his wealth? Remember, they had gained masses of herds and servants. That's why they split. Lot went down toward the Jordan Valley. Abraham just stayed on the other way, so there would be no arguments. How does Lot go from that to a place where he is scrambling for his very life? Well, if we look, in the Bible, we find the path is honestly probably the same path that many of us have taken in our life to get us into the spot we find ourselves sometimes. Notice in Genesis chapter 13, verses 10 through 13, when they split, Lot looks toward Sodom, toward the valley of Jordan. He sees, hey, there's a lot of green grass, there's a lot of nice trees, there's water, I won't have to dig wells, everything's established. That's an easy way. He knows about Sodom. The name of the town has not changed. The same name, excuse me, that's where we get the root word for our English word, to sodomize someone or something, to do unspeakable acts to them. This town has that name for a reason. In Genesis chapter 14, verse 12, we find Lot is living in the city. That's when he's taken captive. And then what we just read, what we just saw in Genesis 19:1, that Lot is sitting at the gate. So Lot goes from overlooking the town, going down to the valley, being on the outskirts, to living in the town and being held captive. Then he's freed because of Abraham's heroics. Did he learn his lesson? Nope. Now we find him sitting at the gate. It's not just that he was sitting out there eating peanuts, had nothing else to do, right? Like we do today. Old men sitting out on the front porch, sitting out in front of the barber station downtown, whatever it may be, right? When you sat at the gate in the city, it means you were a man of stature and people respected you. So when it says that Lot was sitting at the gate, he had become someone that people would trust and would come to him for knowledge and understanding, and maybe even to adjudicate some cases. How does Lot find himself there? Well, it's a series of choices, right? It's a series of choices that didn't seem bad at the time. Hey, I don't want to have to dig a well. There's plenty of wells and stuff near the city of Sodom. Let's just go live near there. Well, I'm tired of carrying water. I'm tired of having to walk to the market. What if we just buy a house there? It's a process of a slow fade. Years ago, Casting Crowns wrote a song about this, and it reads like this: "Be careful, little eyes, what you see. And it's the second glass that ties your hands, and darkness pulls the strings. Be careful, little feet, where you go, for it's the little feet behind you that are sure to follow. Be careful, little ears, what you hear. When flattery leads to compromise, the end is always near." Do you see what they're saying? It's all the little decisions. Your eyes, when you're flipping through your instant media, whatever it may be, or whether it's something else. Do you realize this? Maybe some of you, there's a thing out there on Facebook, right? And it tells you how they get you sucked in. But do you realize that Facebook now is ocular? That when you have Facebook on your phone or whatever, it's not going where your finger goes. It follows your eyes. So when you look at something too long, guess what it does? It gives you more of those ads. Don't believe me? Try it. Look at something stupid you would never look at on Facebook. Stay on that page for a second and see what happens next in your feed. Your eyes. Facebook knows that. That's why they have this technology. That's why they're using it. All of a sudden, your feed, you're going to get all these ads and this stuff that you don't want. Be careful, little feet, where you go. You may be able to stop the path you're on, but your kids that are watching you may not have the strength to stop that. Be careful, ears, what you hear. That flattery, hey, you look good today. Those conversations, they're tearing down walls if we're not careful. For empty words and promises lead broken hearts astray. The chorus goes like this: it's a slow fade when you give yourself away. It's a slow fade when black and white turn to what? Gray. How many of us have done that in our lives? Black and white decisions, I'm never going to do that. Oh, that's not so bad after all, right? That's okay. Now, when I was a kid, there were black and white rules in my house. Mom, especially, Dad too, there were black and white rules. As I grew older, I realized those black and white rules were there for me, not necessarily because they're black and whites. But because they knew me and knew my instances, there were black and white rules. For my kids, there were black and white rules. Did they break them? Yeah, as they're getting older, they're getting more brave to tell me the stories of their foolishness. All right? And I thank the Lord that they weren't in jail. They didn't tragically mess up their lives. I told my kids all the time, it is my job to get you to 18 in my house. The rest of it's on you. All right? I did my part before God. Now it's on you. You want to be stupid? You want to do this to that? Here's your chance. You have the rest of your life to screw it up. All right? My time is done. Right? It's a slow fade. Those black and white things that we set for our kids when they're in our house to protect them, eventually they have to decide if those are going to be the black and white rules for them. But why do we say it's gray? Do you realize there's no gray with God? That God truly is light? It's either right or it's wrong. Now, I'll tell you this. There are things that are right for me that may be wrong for you. And there are things that are wrong for you that may be right for me because God's created us different. But God's absolutes are still his absolutes. Thoughts invade. Choices are made. A price, get this, a price will be paid when you give yourself away. People never crumble in a day. The refrain goes like this: the journey from your mind to your hands is shorter than you think. Be careful if you think you stand, you just might be sinking. Oh, I've got it under control. I can stop any time, has said every alcoholic and addict in their life. And how many times do they have to quit before it sticks? Some of them, it's death. I've got it under control. It's a slow fade. That's what happened to Lot. He slowly took the easy way. He slowly made decisions that probably meant ease in his life, but kept bringing him down. As morning dawned, Genesis 19, verse 15. I've told you the story. Let's see near the end of it. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Up, take your wife, your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city." Get this, the next words. But he lingered. Men, what does lingered look like? Whenever we want to go somewhere, our wife does what? Lingers. That's not always the case. Some men have become lingerers, but usually it is our wife, right? We're going to start the car. I'm leaving you. All that other stuff. We're in the car's hot, the car's warm, cold, warm, whatever we're supposed to do to it. And where is she? Lingering. All right? Lingering. In other words, I'm not taking action. I'm just lingering. Oh, isn't that pretty? Oh, I haven't said hi to them yet. We find any reason not to take care of what needs to get taken care of. And that's what Lot is doing. Oh, I need this. Oh, I need that. I need to say bye to them. I need to say bye to them. He's making every excuse he can. Notice next. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters. Again, Lot's thought process is not very good. I'm trying to drill that into your head. As a dad, he is failing. As the leader of his home, he has failed and he is failing right now. He is not protecting his family. These 2 angels have to make him do what he should be doing automatically in his home. Seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, and the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. Lot's fade into sin was so bad that when tragedy was right on the horizon and he knew it, he couldn't pull himself away. Think Lot's the only one that has fought with the sin nature, that has fought with something that's grabbed a hold of him? How about the great apostle Paul? He writes in Romans chapter 7, verse 14, he wrote this: "For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am of flesh." In other words, all the things that God tells us to do that are right and will protect us, we know that's good. He goes, "But I am of the flesh," get this, "sold under sin." In other words, sin is my owner. It is my master. I am a slave to it. For I do not understand my own actions. We can try, and a lot of people try and plead insanity all the time, right? I don't remember what I did. I don't understand why I did that. And in law enforcement, people try and say that all the time. I don't remember. I blacked out. And usually, if you have a good interrogator, as you keep asking questions, they slip up and they say something they remember, a color or something they saw, and you're like, see, you do remember. You were there. You weren't out of your mind like you said you were. He says, for I do not understand my own actions. In other words, Paul says, it's like I am outside of my body, watching my body do things I'm telling it not to do. Right? For I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing that I hate. In other words, I want to stop staring at that stuff on the internet I'm supposed to. I want to stop that bad habit in my life that is destroying me, that is destroying my family. I want to take hold of that sin. I want to stop it. But every time I say I'm going to stop it, I'm watching myself do it again. He goes on to say, oh, wretched man that I am. In other words, in and of ourselves, because of our sin nature, we can't stop it. We can't. That was the whole point of our message last week. That's why God gives us a new name. He gives us a new life through Jesus Christ, because he realizes that the sin nature cannot be stopped. It can only be replaced with a new life. And that's why we struggled. That's why Paul struggled. It's not because he wasn't close to God. It's not because he didn't know what was right or wrong. It's because of this sin nature that we keep getting from our parents and from their parents and all the way back to Adam and Eve is at rule in our life, and we struggle. We have to watch what we do. So how do we escape? If we know we have these things in our life, if we know we have sin that we can't get rid of, if we know we have things that are about to kill us, how do we escape? Well, we escape the same way that Lot escaped. Well, Pastor, you're telling me that Lot didn't escape. These men had to grab hold of him. Yep. And why did these men grab a hold of him? Genesis chapter 19, verse 29. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. Lot was saved not because he was righteous. Lot was saved not because he promised God, this time I am not going to live in the city. This time my life is going to be a shining beacon. This time everyone's going to look at me and say, man, that guy reflects God. He reflects right judgment. That's not why Lot was saved. Lot was saved because of God's mercy. Lot was saved because his uncle lived right before God. It's the same way we're saved. I would not be sitting here today. I would not know that heaven is eternally my home if it had not been for my parents instilling that in me. My parents would not have instilled that in me if their parents had not gotten saved and instilled that into them. Yes, I come from a line of parents that instilled that in their kids. I am one of the fortunate ones. Some of you don't have that testimony. Some of you come from a home where your parents didn't go to church, not even on Christmas. Some of you come from different backgrounds, but I am fortunate enough that I get to sit under the blessing umbrella of parents and grandparents that served God. So I am blessed that way. See, dads, moms, what you do in your home will matter with your kids and your grandkids and your nieces and your nephews. That's just the way God works. But God showed, no, let me rephrase that, because I just read you the story. God forced mercy and love onto Lot when Lot didn't want it. And many of us here today, if we're honest, God's had to get a hold of us by force through grace and mercy and love. Because, see, we thought we had it under control, right? Till we didn't. And we always cry out to God when it's too late, don't we? We always cry out to God after our marriage is broken. We always cry out to God when we're in jail. Instead of before, hey, should I make this right choice? We always wait until it's too late. And here it is. when we can't fix it anymore. Notice in Ephesians 2:8, for by grace you have been saved through faith. Abraham, that journey of faith, that journey into God's mercies and greatness, saved through grace by faith. It's not your own doing, it's the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one would boast. See, Lot's salvation from Sodom was not based on anything he did, because if it was, he would be doomed. He would have been doomed. We know his wife, and I mentioned this last week, that it seems his wife was a bad influence on him, which goes to all you kids looking for a spouse. You better look more than skin deep, because I'm sure Lot's wife was beautiful, but she was probably a very bad influence. Because when the angels say, don't turn around and look, when they get to the place where it's safe, the Bible tells us that Lot's wife turns around and looks, right? Why did Lot dilly and dally? Probably because his wife wasn't getting things together. And instead of saying, woman, let's go, he had to wait for these two angels of death to grab them and take them out. Be careful who you tie your life to. The result of Lot's life should be death. But God decided to save Lot. Why does God decide to extend mercy and love and salvation to me? He knows all the things that he's given me in my life. I told you about my heritage. Man, you should be following Christ, right on his heels. There should be no sin. There should be no areas where God had to come pull you out of the shipwreck. And yet that's not my story. There's times where I turn my back, where I said, I don't need this. I don't need to be around God, where I wanted to try things, when I wanted to do. That's not, God should have rejected me because of everything he's given me. He should have said, I've given you so much. I'm not dealing with you anymore. But he didn't. Why? Many of you have the same story. Why? I can't tell you. All I can tell you is the Bible tells me that God is rich in mercy and love. And the Bible tells me in 1 Peter that he is willing that none should perish, but that all should come to repentance. My Bible tells me that through the story of Lot, through the story of Abraham, through the story of David, and I could go all through the story of Moses, that even though God gives great responsibility to these great men, they are still men with a flawed sin nature, and God doesn't hide their flaws. He still works through them. So in other words, God can still work through any of us who have failed. Even through murderers, adulterers, liars, someone who loses his temper all the time. I mean, I can go on and on. Doubters of God's promises. He still uses us. Why? Because God is great. How long will you push God? How long will you test him? Are you going to be one of those stories that you barely escape tragedy, that God literally has to pull you out? You realize all this time that Lot is going through this turmoil in his life, that Abraham is over here living the blessing? You realize that, right? Because Abraham was still walking by faith, because Abraham was still following God, while Lot is struggling, Abraham is being blessed. See, that blessing is how we can live. I'm not saying God's going to give us all riches, that he's all going to give us goodness, that nothing ever tragic's going to come in our life. But Abraham's story is way different than Lot's. And yet God extends righteousness to Abraham, and God extends righteousness to Lot. Wherever you are today, there is a God who loves you and is calling for you to follow him and to live in relationship with him.